Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the fourth iteration of our TexTalks webinar series. If you've missed our previous webinars, you can find the recordings for those on our YouTube channel. Before we get rolling, we have a few housekeeping items to highlight. At the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see a Q&A window. If you have a question that you'd like to ask our speaker for today, please make sure to submit it there. You can also use this window to contact our behind-the-scenes team if you're experiencing technical difficulties or if you have a more general question. Lastly, a recording of this webinar will also be available later this afternoon on our YouTube channel. Without further ado, we will introduce our moderator for today, Dr. Eric Rowe. He is the Executive Director of Texas Engineering Executive Education, which is the continuing and professional education unit of the Cockrell School of Engineering at UT Austin. Take it away, Dr. Rowe.
Good morning, everybody. And as Javier said, welcome to our TexTalks webinar. This webinar is going to be very Q&A driven. So as Javier said, please enter your questions in the Q&A window. And after a few introductory remarks, we'll have the Q&A to steer the discussion for the rest of the meeting. So I take immense pleasure in welcoming our speaker this week, Dr. Michael Weber. I've known Michael since I joined UT Austin. I was fortunate that he was actually on the interview committee that brought me to Texas from Florida. So I'd like to give you a little bit of background on Michael, though if you're here, you probably know his background. And as I said, I look forward to a really good discussion today. So Dr. Michael Weber is based in Paris, France, though he's presently back here in Austin, where he serves as the Chief Science and Technology Officer at ENGIE, a global energy and infrastructure services company. Michael is also the Josie Centennial Professor in Energy Resources at the University of Texas at Austin. His expertise spans research and education at the convergence of engineering, policy, and commercialization on topics related to innovation, energy, and the environment. His latest book, Power Trip: The Story of Energy, was published May 7th, 2019 by Basic Books, with a 6-part companion series that aired on PBS, Amazon Prime, and iTunes that started back on Earth Day this year in 2020. If you haven't seen it, I recommend seeking that out. It's a great series. His first book, Thirst for Power, Energy, Water, and Human Survival, which addresses the connection between Earth's most valuable resources and offers a hopeful approach towards a sustainable future, was published in 2016 by Yale Press and was converted to a documentary. He was selected as a fellow of ASME and as a member of the 4th class of the Presidential Leadership Scholars, which is a leadership training program organized by Presidents George W. Bush and Bill Clinton. Michael has authored more than 400 publications, holds 6 patents, and serves on the advisory board for Scientific American. Successful entrepreneur. He's one of the 3 founders in 2015 of an educational technology startup, Disco Learning Media, which was acquired in 2018. He holds a BS and BA from UT Austin, an MS and PhD in mechanical engineering from Stanford University. He was honored as an American Fellow of the German Marshall Fund and AT&T Industrial Ecology Fellow, and on 4 separate occasions by the University of Texas for exceptional learning. I'm also pleased to note he's worked with our Engineering Executive Education and our Petroleum Extension PETEX groups on talent development, courses, programs, and publications. So a great relationship and a great speaker for today. Thank you, Michael, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for reading my bio just the way my mother wrote it. So I appreciate your kind words. Happy to be here. As you heard, I'm a Longhorn. I did my undergraduate work at UT. Now I'm a faculty member at UT, but also working in Paris on leave from UT to work in Paris at this global energy company. And I thought I would make some remarks for a few minutes and then just a Q&A so we can talk about what you want, your questions on energy and the environment. You know, I'll make remarks just to set up some trends and some things that might be worth keeping in mind. I've mentioned I'm a UT guy. I also grew up on campus. So my father was a professor of chemistry from 1966 until 2005. And then I joined in 2006 as a faculty member. So there's been a continuum of Professor Weber's since 1966. In fact, some of you on the call might have been a student of his or a colleague of his or a friend of his. So I think that's one other little tidbit about me. On energy, you heard I wrote this book, Power Trip, The Story of Energy, and I have this PBS series, and you might ask why I would write a book about energy. And the reason I would write about energy is because I think energy is fundamental. This is one of my life conclusions, is that energy is fundamental to everything we care about. It's central to every element of society. You name the topic: pandemics, cybersecurity, national security, the environment, public health, the economy. Energy's got a piece of it. And so it's worth studying, it's worth learning about, it's worth talking about. And so I appreciate you being part of the conversation today. So it's fundamental. That's why we should talk about it. It's also hidden right in front of our eyes. It's embedded in everything we're doing. It's embedded in an IT-based webinar like we're doing now. There's a light on my face right now. That's energy. There's energy in the desk materials that I'm sitting at and in my chair. It's in the plastics. It's all around us, but hidden right in front of our eyes. So it's got this sort of invisible magic element to it. I think that's important, that despite how ubiquitous energy is, we don't really know what it is. And let me quote Nobel laureate Richard Feynman. Richard Feynman, a very famous professor, who said, "It's important to realize that in physics today, we have no knowledge of what energy is. We can anticipate energy's impacts on the environment. We can think about the cost of energy or the way we use energy in our home with electric lighting or heat of the stove or air conditioning or whatever it is. We can't really say what it is other than this textbook definition of the ability to do work," which I would say is the classic definition, but actually energy might be better said to be the ability to do something useful. We can use energy for work, for machines, like with the Industrial Revolution, but we also use it for lighting and for computers, which are useful, but not necessarily the same as work. In fact, you might argue that social media and computers are the opposite of work, but they're enabled by energy nevertheless. So energy is everywhere, it's ubiquitous, it's hidden right in front of our eyes, yet it's sort of mysterious. We don't know what it is. I would say it's also kind of like magic. It brings light to dark, it brings warmth to cold or cold to heat in Texas. It treats, cleans, moves water, helps give us preserved and abundant food. It gives us comfortable buildings. So there's this magical element to energy. It gives us these amazing capabilities. And I would say that some of this concept of magic of energy is captured in our popular literature and culture. So let me give a couple examples. Some of you know the story of a unicorn. So these days, a unicorn is a billion-dollar tech startup. But in the old days, a unicorn was a mythical single-horned creature. And it was mythical partly because it was hard to find. These are rare. You wouldn't see a unicorn in nature very readily. But the true magic in the unicorn wasn't its rarity or single horn design. It's that the horn had the ability to rid a stream of poison, that the unicorn's horn could make water that was toxic safe to drink. That's the magic of a unicorn's horn. That's the magic of a unicorn. And today we use energy to make water clean. We've replaced a unicorn's magic with energy. Today we use energy to heat and treat and chill and pressurize and move water. That's one example. Let me give you another example of the Greek figure Tantalus. Tantalus was a Greek figure who misbehaved, and Tantalus was punished by the Greek gods. Tantalus was given eternal thirst and eternal hunger and placed in a pond of water below a fig tree. And as Tantalus would reach for the fig tree, the branch would bend out of reach. And as Tantalus bent down to take a drink of the water in the pond, the water would recede out of reach. So the water and food were always out of reach, and that's where we get the word tantalize, which means food and water just out of reach for Tantalus, this character. Well, today we use energy to bring water and food within reach. So we can say we use energy to overcome the power of the Greek gods. That's the magic of energy. Let me give an example of Walt Disney movie Fantasia. You might have seen Fantasia. When did that come out? 1930s or 40s, so 80, 90 years ago. Is this incredible epic film that's animated to music. And the idea that Walt Disney had is with Fantasia, he would make images you could hear and music you could see. So it was coupled with the soundtrack, and he worked with the famous conductor Stokowski, and I think it was the Philadelphia Symphonic Orchestra that did the soundtrack. And one of the classic scenes of Fantasia is the story of Mickey Mouse and the Sorcerer's Apprentice, where Mickey Mouse, dressed up in the famous sort of garb, the wizard's robe and the hat, he's given the chore to go fetch water. And carrying water is heavy. A gallon of water is like 8.5 pounds, so a bucket of water is like 20 pounds, and 2 buckets like 40 pounds. So if you got to carry 2 buckets of water from the well up the stairs, as Mickey did, it's a burdensome chore. A chore, by the way, endured by women and children around the world today if they don't have access to modern energy. Mickey doesn't want to do the chore, so he uses a magic spell. He casts a spell on a broom to carry the water for him, and then accidentally, as he discovers the broom gets out of control, he breaks it, and then it multiplies. There becomes a flood. It gets out of control until the sorcerer wakes up and solves everything. But the idea here is that he wanted to use magic to do the chore of lifting water because lifting water and carrying water and fetching water is so heavy. Well, today we use electric pumps to do that. We've replaced the magic of Mickey Mouse and Fantasia with an electric pump. We use modern energy as a form of magic. Let me give a fourth example. Rumpelstiltskin. the classic alchemist who was given the task of turning low-grade materials like hair or straw or lead into gold. That's what Rumpelstiltskin did, and this was the pursuit of medieval alchemists. If only we could take things that are not worth much and turn them into things that are very valuable. That would be incredible. Well, that's the modern petrochemical refinery today. It takes something not very valuable, petroleum, and turns it into something very valuable, gasoline or pharmaceuticals or petrochemicals or even perfumes. The cost of oil is about 20 cents per pound on a crude basis. The crude oil, about 20 cents per pound. Lead is 50 cents per pound. Crude oil is worth less than lead. And what do we turn crude oil to? Chanel No. 5 perfume, which is worth more than gold on a per ounce basis. So the modern refinery is like the medieval alchemist that could do the magic of converting something really low value and common and heavy into something really valuable. That's the magic that we see in culture, and that's what we achieve on a daily basis with energy today. So I think that's kind of cool. Energy is ubiquitous, it's mysterious, it's magical. And Arthur C. Clarke, the famous science fiction writer, said, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So this indistinguishable technology, this modern energy, does feel magical in many ways. So I like that. That's just all to set up the issue of energy. But I would argue also that energy is important. So I introduced you to the Nobel laureate, Richard Feynman. Let me introduce you to another Nobel laureate, Rick Smalley. Rick Smalley was a professor at Rice University in Texas. And Smalley got the Nobel Prize for his work in discovering Buckminster fullerene, or the buckyball. This is a C60, carbon-60 geodesic dome-shaped molecule or structure that gave materials with novel capabilities. And he spent the last few years of his life, before he died about 15 years ago, giving speeches around the world talking about the 10 grand challenges of humanity. These are the 10 challenges, and they're called Smalley's List. And Smalley's List says, here are the 10 challenges for humanity: energy, water, food, the environment, poverty, terrorism and war, disease, education, democracy, and population. These are the 10 challenges of society. And he put energy at the top of the list, saying if we can solve our energy problems, then we can solve our water problems. And if we can solve our water problems, we can solve our food problems, because we use energy and water for food. And if we can solve our food problems, let me back up. If we have accessible, available, sustainable, affordable, reliable energy, then we can have water, because we can pump water long distances or desalt the oceans, that kind of thing. Once we have energy, water, we can grow our food. Once we have food, then we can protect the environment, which lifts people out of poverty, which prevents terrorism or war. Then we can tackle disease. Then we can deal with education, which is an ingredient for democracy. Then we can tackle population. And I think that's the logic. And I really agree that energy is first. Those are the 10 challenges. And if we tackle energy first, it's a gateway to solving those other problems. So this all leads up to the concept that energy is important, ubiquitous, magical, and mysterious. And if we do it the right way, it makes us healthy, wealthy, and safe. But energy done the wrong way makes us sick, poor, and insecure. We might as well take the trouble to do it the right way. That's what I would say. So that's the context for why I care about energy and why we should pay attention to it. When I write about energy or talk about energy, I often discuss in 6 parts. And these are the 6 episodes of the PBS series, or the 6 chapters of the book Power Trip. And they also comprise different lectures in my semester-long graduate energy course for my PhD students, or for my freshman energy courses. I talk about water, food, transportation, cities, wealth, and security. These are sort of end uses and impacts of energy. And by the way, the environment, innovation, and electricity cut across all of them. If we look just at water, we use energy for water and we use water for energy. We use water to cool power plants, to grow biofuels. We use water to make steam, to refine fuels. We use water to move fuels, for example, with barges and ships, that kind of thing. And so water is all up and down the energy supply chain. This means that if water is not available when you need it, how you need it, and the quality you need it, meaning like the right abundance and the right temperature, you can't run your power plant, and the energy system is vulnerable to a water constraint of some sort. Other way around, we use energy for water. We use energy to pump water, to treat it, to heat it, to chill it, to pressurize it, to make ice, all the things we do in Texas. And if you don't have energy available, then your water system is at risk. In fact, this happens after hurricanes. When the power goes out, the water system goes out. This is the public health risk to us. So we need to think about this energy-water relationship, and they're very interconnected. I can say the same thing about food. We use a lot of energy for food. We use energy in the food. So food is a form of energy that we consume for our bodies. And about 1% of national energy consumption in the United States is in the food that we consume. So we are literally eating 1% of the energy we consume as a nation. But there's another 9% of the energy we consume as a nation that goes into the other parts of the energy system. This includes the diesel for the tractors, the natural gas to make the fertilizers or pesticides, the electricity for the refrigeration, the natural gas to cook the food on the stovetop, the energy to take away the food waste, all of that. You add up the whole supply chain, and that's 10% of national energy consumption is just in the food system. Sadly, we then throw away 25 to 50% of our edible food, which is really incredible. That means there's so much energy embedded in the food we throw away that we could power entire countries like Sweden or Switzerland for a year. So this is incredible. So much energy embedded in our food system, so much food we throw away because we're rich in America and we have food abundance that this becomes a real disaster. Other countries that are poor don't have food waste. They don't have as much waste. They don't have the excess to throw away. So there's an energy food relationship. And as we go towards corn-based biofuels, there's now food for energy, not just energy for food. So it goes the other way around. We also think about energy and transportation. In fact, transportation is a big user of energy. About 28% of our energy goes to transportation. Transportation is now, at least in the United States, the biggest source of carbon dioxide emissions. It's bigger than the power sector. It's bigger than industry. It's bigger than our homes. So transportation is a big consumer of energy and a big impact on the environment. Also a big enabler of freedom. It gives us the ability to go different places. I mean, with my life, where I live in Paris and Austin, I can fly back and forth, something unimaginable even 50 years ago, where it would have been cost prohibitive, but cheap energy and modern technology makes it affordable and easy. So there's a transportation relationship where transportation is good, but the impacts are bad. There's also cities. Cities are responsible for 40% of our energy consumption. The built environment, the energy for elevators and lighting and all the things we do in cities, it takes 40%. That's big, but cities also offer cultural opportunities, economic opportunities, a way of life that some people like. It also offers a lot of light pollution, a lot of noise and congestion. So the trade-offs of cities. And then wealth is another part of the energy story. Energy and wealth go hand in hand. Consuming energy, if you're poor, can make you richer and more comfortable. And then if you're rich, you consume more energy because you travel or you have a bigger house or you have an air conditioner, that kind of thing. So energy is a pathway to wealth, and wealth is a pathway to energy. Although at some point, if you consume too much energy, the pollution and the other environmental impacts of that energy consumption work against you, and society can become poorer again. So we have to keep an eye on that. And then the sixth topic is security or war, the way we use energy to improve our security with weapons and airplanes and this kind of thing. Also, it can undermine our security if we buy energy from countries who hate us, and if they use the money from those energy sales to finance weapon systems they can use to threaten us. So energy has changed war. It's changed the way we fight war, how we fight a war, where we fight a war, why we fight a war. It improves our security in some elements and undermines it in others. So those are 6 topics of energy for the story of energy. That whole context of the interconnection of energy with all these parts of society is changing because of 6 demographic trends, 3 technology trends, and 1 two-sided challenge. The 6 demographic trends are population growth, economic growth, urbanization, industrialization, electrification, and motorization. So we have population growth, there's more of us. In economic growth, we're getting richer. And as people are born and we live longer, which is great news, we consume soil, food, energy, water, that kind of thing. So demand goes up. And as we get richer, we use more of each. So per capita growth on top of the population growth. So it's like compounded growth. And there's urbanization and industrialization. We're moving from farm to factory, from rural area to city. So we're changing where we use energy and what we use it for. Instead of using energy for food, we're using it for manufacturing and comfort and that kind of thing. And then electrification and motorization. As societies get rich, they like electricity. That is one of the fuels of the rich. The other is mobility. People like the freedom of travel and like having cars. So in all, everything's changing because we also have this policy overlay of concern about climate and domestic fuels, that kind of thing. So we're changing how much we use, what we use it for. Everything in the energy system is changing right in front of our eyes. And this rapid transition is really disruptive for some people and a big opportunity for others. And we can talk about who's disrupted. You might guess coal mining companies are disrupted. Oil and gas companies are struggling now. There's some new growth with technology and some other things. So we can talk about who wins and who loses from these trends. There are technology trends on top of those demographic trends. I mentioned the 6 demographic trends. The 3 technology trends are increasing efficiency. We're using less mass energy material per thing we do. It takes less energy for my light bulbs today and my car today than I did 20 years ago. We're producing more efficiently. The second technology trend is the rise of information intensity. There's more data embedded in the things we do. In fact, that data intensity, that information intensity is a pathway to the energy efficiency, which is the first trend. By having more information, we can manage in a better way and therefore use less energy and material. And a third technology trend is increasing decentralization or decreasing centralization, which means we're going from large power plants far away to small power plants on our roof, or large water systems far away to rain barrels in our backyard, or large factories far away to 3D printers on our desktop. We're going from large hospitals to telemedicine. This decentralized trend changes our mix of assets and invites other opportunities and other challenges. So those are 6 demographic trends, 3 technology trends, 1 two-sided challenge, which is how do we increase energy access for those who don't have it, while decreasing the energy impacts for those who do have it. In the West, where we have energy access, we think about climate change and decreasing impacts. In the sub-Saharan African part of the world, or Southeast Asia, or Latin America, where they have 1 billion people without access to electricity, even more without access to sanitation or piped water, it's an access problem. It's not a reduce emissions problem. So we have to do both, though. We have to reduce our emissions in the US, Europe, Japan, and Australia, and we have to increase access for those who don't have it. This is the dual-sided challenge. So just saying use less isn't quite the answer, because there are people who actually need to use more. So it's around reducing impacts along the way. If we had to figure this all out, boy, we could talk about technology trends, everything else, and history. I'll just start with one closing comment, then open up for Q&A. I guess the point I'd like to make to you is that I think the energy system's important enough to matter. I appreciate your taking the time to talk about it. I hope you are reading about it. It's a part of our decisions we have to make as a population. It's a part of our decisions we have to make as individuals and families and commuters and consumers and parents and everything else. So it's important enough to matter. And the decisions we make today could cost trillions and last decades. If we're going to tackle climate change, this is a multi-trillion to multi-tens of trillions dollars kind of investment required globally. And we have to make those decisions in the coming years. And then we have to build a lot of stuff that will last decades, because the environmental problems of climate change will last decades to centuries. The longer we wait, the harder it gets. So we have to pay attention. And I think to solve it, well, I think we can solve it. I'm an optimist. I think we will solve it. To be an engineer, you have to be an optimist, because engineers solve problems. So you have to believe a problem is solvable. And so therefore, I'm an optimist. I think we can solve it. But I think we need new thinking. I think we need long-term global thinking versus short-term local thinking. Instead of just thinking about what affects me today in my backyard, and to think about what will affect someone else around the world. So this is the issue with climate change. The people who are affected haven't been born yet and will be born halfway around the world. We have trouble doing things to protect the environment today when it kills our children. But if it's not going to hurt our children, but someone else's children 100 years from now, halfway around the world, that's a hard policy problem to solve. And one way to solve it is to think, well, there's no such thing as other people's children. There's only children, and do we care about them or not? Another issue with that is not just the long-term and global versus local, but what do we do in the long run? And in the long run, the tension between economic and environmental benefits converge. So today we might say in a false choice, well, do you care about the economy or the environment? And the answer is we care about both, right? We want the environment and we want the economy to give us a chance for prosperity. But it's often posed as one or the other, that doing the thing for the environment is expensive. The more efficient car costs more money. The more efficient windows or air conditioners cost more money. To do carbon capture at a coal plant costs money. It feels like it costs a lot more money because it costs more money up front. But in the long run, you get savings. You get operational savings, and you get avoided pollution and other damages. And so in the long run, the economic environmental answers converge. The economic answer is the environmental answer. It's only in the short term that you have this tension. But if you go out 30 years or more and you trash the environment, you don't have an economy. You can't have a successful economy if people can't breathe and they can't work because they're in the hospital. So the long-term thinking helps us solve these false choices that are really an issue in the short term. So that's my view. I think all of us have a role to play. That's one thing about energy that's unique. There are 7+ billion decision makers on energy. Every time you use an appliance or walk to work instead of drive or whatever it is, you have all these choices. So we all have a role to play. These are long-term decisions. We got to get to thinking straight. And I think discussion is the first step in the process. So with that, I'll stop. I really appreciate your time. I already see those questions in the Q&A, and I look forward to talking some more about it.
Great, thank you. Boy, lots to think about there. So let me start with a follow-up question about the unicorn. No, I'm just kidding.
We'll go look at unicorns together.
Yeah. So the water energy nexus, right? So water availability can constrain power production. Obviously, the vital water infrastructure relies on power generation. Where do we see this kind of nexus of research, big data, policy, all coming together in kind of a harmonization to make sure that those things can live in balance to serve society?
And that's a great question, and they can live in balance, right? If we have a setup where the systems are cross-vulnerable, a problem in one becomes a problem in the other. But we could design it where they prop each other up, where one becomes a solution to the other, and they become more resilient. So they're interconnected rather than interdependent in a vulnerable way. And I think we can get there. And I'll say that Texas is a great place to look at this. because we are an energy state, we are a water constrained state, we have heat waves and droughts and frosts and freeze snaps and all these kind of things that affect the power sector. We've experienced it. The cold snap 2011, it got cold, water froze, tripped power plants offline, we had rotating blackouts. That was a water event. And we have hurricanes that come through and knock out the energy infrastructure. We have droughts that reduce the amount of water available for cooling power plants. We have water that's too hot that reduce the ability for water to cool the power plant. So we have all sorts of water issues in Texas, and we're an energy state. So we're a state that can really lead on this, maybe along with California and Israel and Australia. There are places where water constraints, these arid climates, lead to leadership on this. So Texas is a good place to think about this. And the University of Texas is one of the leaders on this with a few other places around the world. And I think you mentioned big data. I think that's one of the opportunities, right? So tracking the water system with more fidelity would help. We track the energy system with much greater fidelity. We have available statistics to through the EIA, the Energy Information Administration, a government administration. We have energy statistics available weekly about what we're using, how much we use, and what we pay. Water statistics are updated like every 5 to 10 years. So the frequency at which we update the water system is much less often than how we update the energy system, yet water can change from day to day or hour to hour in different places. So I think we have a big data problem and a big data collection problem, and there's room for researchers and policy and government and industry to play there. So that's one part of it. If we think of the power grid, we balance the grid like every 15 milliseconds. So energy is real time kind of stuff, but water doesn't feel like it is, even at least not on the data side. So data is an opportunity. We can also work on our planning. A lot of water planners assume they'll have the energy they need. A lot of energy planners assume they have the water they need. That doesn't always work out to be true. There could be these constraints. So I think we have a planning process we can improve as well. And there's certainly opportunities for technologies of membranes that treat water with less energy, or new heat exchanger systems that help you cool your power plant with less water and this kind of thing. So there's a great engineering opportunity along with policy and planning and data. And then the last thing I say is I think our markets are inefficient. We have very efficient wholesale power markets in Texas. We have very efficient oil and gas markets that are global. We don't have very efficient water markets. And I would say that as efficient as our energy markets are, they don't price the pollution in. You can pollute for free. You can dump CO2 into the atmosphere without paying a price. And so even though our markets are efficient, they're incomplete. And so we have incomplete but efficient markets on energy and incomplete and inefficient markets on water. So there's an opportunity for the market design as well, which means social scientists and economists, that kind of thing. Everybody has a role to play in improving the reliability of our energy water systems.
Great. So let me expand on the water one and kind of shift to some of the questions we got around what's happening with COVID-19 and the pandemic, right? So a couple of things are happening. We're seeing shifts in the way we're working, which is probably affecting energy utilization. And I'm not sure if we know which direction it's affecting it yet. But also to the water point, cities are deferring maintenance and there are downturns in staffing. So how is the pandemic affecting water security? And if I think of Flint, Michigan as an extreme example, right? What are the risks associated with what's happening right now and water security?
So maybe I'll talk about these a little differently, although they're coupled. So I'll talk about 2 points. One is what's the future of cities in a post-COVID world, which we don't fully know the answer to, but it's a great question. And how does that affect our ability to plan for large systems like water, but also mass transit and other things? So let's talk about cities. Austin and other cities are a ghost town. Also see Paris. Paris became a ghost town. People working at home. People had to stay at home for the public health situation. And this is really phenomenal. So it's pretty scary, but it's also a good opportunity. So if we look at teleworking is one of those things that changed dramatically with COVID. Before COVID, in the United States, about 4% of workers work from home primarily. So 4%. At the peak of stay-at-home orders, it was about 50%. We went up over an order of magnitude. So about half of workers are working from home primarily at the peak of COVID. And now as people are returning back to work, those numbers come back down. But I don't think they're going to go back down to 4%. I think one of the lasting legacies of COVID will be that number will be 4% or a little higher. So you might hear noise in the background. That's my cats knocking over jars of glass and that kind of thing. One of the joys of working at home, right? So the 50% will drop back down, but not to 4%. And this will affect the population density of downtown areas, at least for working, because that's where a lot of people work. They live in the suburbs and work in the city. So that will affect commercial real estate for sure. In Austin, the vacancy or occupancy rates of commercial real estate have already dropped from 92% to 87%. It dropped 5% already. That's a huge change for commercial real estate. And I expect a lot of bankruptcies in commercial real estate. So this is interesting, and companies are finding out that they don't have to pay for as much office space if they don't have as many people working there, and they can save money on real estate and office furniture because I'm paying for my office furniture at home. I'm subsidizing the company I work for. For example, University of Texas and NG didn't pay for my home office, I did. It also shifted the electricity burden. The electricity consumption of the building went down, the electricity consumption of home went up, my bill went up. And my air conditioner at home usually is less efficient than the commercial air conditioner. So across the grid, total electricity demand went down just a couple percent in Texas. But in places like Northern Italy, it went down 20%. So it's shifting energy, but might not change it entirely. It's really affecting travel, transportation, cars, aviation, that kind of thing. Electricity is sort of staying the same, dropping just a little bit. Now, this empty city phenomena invites two things. One is an opportunity to add bike lanes and bus lanes. In fact, City of Austin's doing it, Paris is doing it. A lot of people are like, streets are empty. Let's lay those bike lanes now while we don't have much traffic. Let's do the maintenance now. So some of this is actually causing quicker maintenance. Maintenance have been deferred because it disrupts traffic, can now be done because the traffic is gone. Adding the bike lanes in the bus lanes and more sidewalks gives us more options for transit when this is all over. So there's some good news opportunity here. However, the long-term effect is a gutting of city budgets, as the question asked, which means less money for these systems. How will it be prioritized? Generally speaking, cities prioritize water, because if there's one thing you need to do for your city, it's provide safe water. So you put off the other things, you put off the parks, you put off the cultural events, other things, but you have to protect the water. Cities that did not protect the water, like Toledo, Ohio, or Flint, Michigan, or others, were looking to save some money. They decided to save $100,000 to go with a different source of water, didn't have a chemist on staff who knew what the difference was, and they poisoned hundreds of thousands of people. That was a cost-cutting measure, and the lesson is maybe you shouldn't do cost-cutting with water. Maybe water is one of the things where you need to invest as much as possible to make sure the water's safe, because if you poison 100, 200,000 people with additional lead, then you can anticipate that 10 to 20 years from now, there'll be higher rates of crime, higher rates of unemployment, lower cognitive ability, all sorts of things that we know we can tie to lead poisoning. So this is scary for the long term for cities, but I think the bigger risk is not water, it's mass transit. I think because mass transit, especially in Europe where I see this, people don't want to get on a crowded bus or train if there's a pandemic raging. They would rather get in a car by themselves, even if these are stuck in traffic. So mass transit gets gutted because ridership goes down and cities are poor. And actually one of the answers we need for climate and efficiency is mass transit. But one of the things we need for pandemic is less mass transit. So this is intention. So I think this is a real problem. One more comment I'll make on cities is people have said that this is the end of cities. With pandemics, you don't want to be around a bunch of other people. And by the way, this is what people said after 9/11, after the terrorist attacks. This is the end of cities because cities make juicy targets because there's so many people there. But after 9/11, cities actually have thrived. It has been fine. And I think cities will be fine too, but I think they might be different. If you can work from anywhere, why would you live in a city? You could go live in the suburbs or something. But it might be the other way around. If you can work from everywhere, why not work in the country and come to the city for the weekend for the cultural events? Maybe people live in cities for the cultural opportunities instead of the economic opportunities if you can work from anywhere. And maybe there are a lot of people who move out of the cities. This happened in New York. They moved to Westchester County and Long Island and other places. They finally moved out of the city, but a lot of other people are like, oh, I've always wanted to live in the city. Now I can, because I can work for my job in Indiana from the city in New York or whatever. So I think cities will be fine, but we might shift how we're using them, not primarily as economic centers, but primarily as cultural centers. That's what I guess. I really don't know, but I think we are going to see some changes in cities, and the long-term risk to mass transit and to city budgets is very, very real.
So let me shift to hydrogen. We got a couple questions about hydrogen. One, noting that Europe and Asia have been very ambitious in a significant role for hydrogen in their energy modeling. And what role do you see for hydrogen in the United States? And then I'm going to link that to a question from one of our viewers from Peru. What's your opinion about energy production based on hydrogen? Is it feasible for Latin American countries in the short term? So kind of Europe and Asia are moving in that direction. What about our hemisphere?
So I would say really Europe and in Asia, it's really Japan, I would say. Japan is really trying to be the world leader in hydrogen, and they really lead on the hydrogen economy. They were headed towards a plutonium economy. Then Fukushima happened, and then Japan said, okay, maybe we'll do a hydrogen economy. And so Sumitomo and Kawasaki and Honda and a lot of companies are really in Japan are pushing on hydrogen. The EU or the European countries are also pushing on hydrogen, primarily from a decarbonization push, like a way to decarbonize the energy sector. And can this spread to other parts of the world? The answer is yes. And by the way, the United States was the leader 15 years ago. A hallmark of the Bush administration was his prioritization of the hydrogen economy. He gave a speech, I want to say it was around 2004 or 5, saying a child born today, the first car they drive might be a hydrogen car. He pushed for the hydrogen economy, and he funded research on it a lot. And then it was sort of dying out at the end of the Bush administration, and Obama didn't really promote it, but then Obama started promoting it at the end of the Obama administration. So we had a big push for hydrogen 15 years ago. Europe is now doing what we were doing 15 years ago. So different countries take turns leading on the hydrogen economy. And the reason hydrogen is so appealing is because hydrogen, H2, when it burns, does not produce CO2 the way a hydrocarbon would, the way methane or oil or others will do. So hydrogen is much cleaner from a climate perspective. That's why it's appealing. We like hydrogen. It also burns hot, it burns clear. You can use it to make chemicals, you can use it to make heat, you can make electricity, you can use it to make motion. Hydrogen is a magnificent fuel if you have it, but it's hard to produce, move, and store it. Whereas natural gas and oil are very easy to extract, move, and store. So hydrogen's cleaner to burn, but harder to make, move, and store. And so this is a problem we have to solve. But if we could solve it, then that would go a long way towards decarbonizing transportation and the power sector and all sorts of things. Now, Texas is actually one of the biggest producers and users of hydrogen in the world. We don't use it for decarbonization. We use it for chemicals manufacturing on the Gulf Coast. We use it for lightening and sweetening crude oils. The petrochemical industry and the oil industry are the largest producers and consumers of hydrogen around because they have demand for it. The steel industry also likes hydrogen, and so do other sectors, but oil and gas really love hydrogen. So if we make more hydrogen available, we have customers for it already. And the way we make hydrogen today is you have to get it from something else. It's generally not floating around on its own, although there's some places where it is. It's usually bound up in water or fuels like methane. So we have to use electrolysis, electricity, to split the hydrogen out of water, or steam methane reforming to convert natural gas into hydrogen. And that's the way we do it in Texas. And that's the way it's primarily done in the world. So that's the challenge. You have to have excess energy, either excess electricity or excess gas, and then you can make hydrogen. And then when you have hydrogen, you have to compress it, liquefy it, store it, move it somehow, which takes a lot of energy. Then you can use it. You can use it in turbines or fuel cells or engines and all sorts of things. So the challenge of hydrogen is everything up to what I just said about the use. How are we going to make it cheaply, abundantly, affordably? How are we going to do it in a green or sustainable way, and how are we going to move and store it? And with electricity, that's very promising. Electrolysis gets cheaper every year. We could use excess wind and solar to make it. In Latin America, the question with Peru or Brazil or other countries that have hydro, you could use excess hydroelectricity to make hydrogen. It's a little harder to store the electricity if you don't have a big battery. So you use whenever you have excess water flow through your dams, or if you have extra biomass you're burning for electricity, use that electricity to make hydrogen. You could store the hydrogen or convert the hydrogen into synthetic gasoline that you can store very easily. So hydrogen can be made from excess renewables and stored, solving problems with the grid while also giving a stored form of energy. It's very promising. The company where I work, Engie, we're spending big money on hydrogen because we burn a lot of gas, move a lot of gas. We want to decarbonize it. And we see hydrogen as a way to decarbonize it, either by blending it with the natural gas in the pipelines, or by replacing the gas in the pipelines with hydrogen, or by using the hydrogen to make methane that we can then displace the fossil methane or the fossil gas. So hydrogen has a lot of promise and a lot of capability. It's really remarkable. However, it's expensive to make today and it's inefficient. So we got to solve the efficiency and cost issues, which is an engineering challenge and a scale challenge. And it gets better every year, just like batteries get better every year. So it'll get there. The question is, it will get there fast enough? And do we need policy to push it faster, or to constrain the dirtier options? How are we going to get there? I think the solution is through integration. If you're just trying to make hydrogen, it looks expensive. But if you're trying to make hydrogen, solve a transportation need, provide industrial heat, use excess electricity, firm up the grid, and also make water or something like that, if you're doing several things at once, then hydrogen makes a lot more sense. So we see it as part of an integrated suite of solutions as the most likely way to get hydrogen to work.
So let me ask you a Texas-centric question, since I'm sitting here in Austin and you're back in Austin with us now. Yesterday, the Houston Chronicle published a story with some data from Carr Ingram with the Texas Alliance of Energy Producers, right? And the Texas companies, and I'm looking to make sure I have the numbers right, employed 162,000 workers in June, about half of the 297,000 workers at the peak of employment back in 2014. The Texas lost 46,000 jobs from February to June this year as the pandemic crushed the demand for crude, and oil companies stopped drilling, halted production. We had historically low oil prices, and economists are predicting that employment is going to continue to fall, and especially if the pandemic continues longer, right, it will have a significant impact on Texas employment. So, as you were speaking earlier, I thought of the three technology trends that you brought up, right? And that intersection of what's happening to the oil and gas industry combined with installed wind energy in Texas is approaching about 30,000 megawatts. But that's a fraction of the amount that we have potential for in the state. So what can be done in Texas to kind of address hydrocarbon production and what the impact on those jobs are going to be, and then also alternative energy production?
The great question. Texas is a world leader on oil production, gas production, oil refining, also wind production. We will be a leader in solar at some point. I'll talk to that. And I think that's a great question about the potential. So let's talk about the oil and gas jobs. Oil and gas is critical to the Texas economy. It's less critical today than 30 years ago because our economy is diversified with semiconductors, movie production, other things, but it's still critical, generates a lot of jobs that those people pay taxes, generates property taxes, severance taxes, production taxes. So there's all sorts of flows of money generated by oil and gas to the state and local governments and into people's pockets. And it's been just an incredible job creator and wealth creator in Texas for a long time. The oil and gas industry is also very volatile in prices and in employment. The employment really got hit hard in the 2014 to 2016 timeframe when oil prices collapsed. And in 2015, I think there was 150,000 layoffs or something that happened in Texas. It was just really spectacular, the layoffs in 2015. And we never really fully recovered from those layoffs, at least from an employment perspective, although production did recover. And that's because of automation and technology. People were replaced with microprocessors, which is a trend that's been underway in oil and gas for about 100 years, replacing man with machine, that kind of thing. In the 2014 and 2016 price drop accelerated some of that automation trend. Then we come up to today and COVID caused layoffs, but frankly, the layoffs started in December 2019. I know a lot of people who were laid off in 2019 pre-COVID. So oil and gas already had weakness that was showing before COVID, and COVID just added on, which made it much more difficult because demand collapsed for aviation and a lot of driving. So there's a problem. Job loss is not new in oil and gas, but it feels pretty intense right now. Now I can make a quick comment about Texas, which is when 150,000 oil and gas workers lose their jobs in Texas, Houston notices, Texas notices, the nation doesn't notice. The nation doesn't care, which is sort of fascinating because in 2016, President Trump was running for election on a platform about coal miners' jobs because a few thousand coal miners had lost their jobs over 8 years in the Obama administration. And by the way, coal mining employment peaked in 1927. Coal mining employment had been dropping for almost 100 years, so it continued under Obama, but it wasn't really anything specific to Obama. But a couple thousand coal mining jobs lost was a national news story, but 150,000 oil and gas jobs lost didn't seem to generate any sympathy or concern for anyone. So there's something about oil and gas workers where I guess we're kind of heartless and we just don't care, but we do care about coal miners or something as a nation, and I've never really been able to explain that. So that's part of this context, which is job losses happen, they happened already, they're continuing, and now COVID makes it worse. Part of it will be solved by automation. Part of it will be solved by less production, frankly. Texas production will still occur, but it won't be quite as high as where it was unless we get some more technological investments. And so we should worry about the future of oil and gas and what are the ways it might help. Well, oil and gas is not going to go to zero. We use gas for power production, and as electricity demand goes up, we need more electricity. Gas has a market there. As we have export markets of liquefied natural gas to Europe and Asia, natural gas can go there. Oil, we can export the refined products, but if the world's demand for fuels is dropping, that can be hard for oil and gas. But oil and gas can do a couple things. Oil and gas can also do advanced geothermal energy. Advanced geothermal energy is energy extracted from the heat of the earth. And geothermal energy is unique compared to, well, I would say it's unique, it's different compared to wind and solar. It doesn't vary with the weather. The geothermal energy is a 24/7 base load availability. It's available all the time. The earth doesn't go cold all of a sudden at its core or in the crust, deep in the crust. So The people who drill for oil and gas often hit hot water whether they mean to or not. Well, you can use that hot water to make energy. So this is an opportunity with advanced drilling techniques. In fact, there's a consortium on advanced geothermal at UT led out of Petroleum and Geosystems Engineering with Eric Van Noort and a couple other people, Jamie Bird and the incubator. So there are people looking at UT like, how do we use oil and gas expertise for advanced geothermal? We also have something like 4 million wells that have been drilled for oil and gas over history around the world. 1 million of those are in Texas, by the way. So we have a couple million wells in the United States that need to be plugged. Oil and gas can plug those wells, and those wells are leaking greenhouse gases. So there's an environmental remediation service that oil and gas can do that helps us clean up the economy. And then as we produce oil and gas production doesn't go to zero. We still need it for some things. We can do it in a clean way. So there are plenty of places for oil and gas to play. In fact, I just wrote an article a couple months ago arguing that to solve climate change, we need oil and gas. Oil and gas industry is the industry with the global reach and the engineering talent we need to solve our problems. So there's a place for it. It might not be the exact same roles and duties as what it was doing in the 80s, but I think there's a big role for oil and gas. And Texas in particular can lead on this. The last thing on this point is, who knows best how to move CO2 and inject it into the ground? The oil and gas industry, because they've been doing it for decades for enhanced oil recovery. So if we need expertise on getting CO2 out of the atmosphere and into the ground, well, that's who we'll go to. And Texas is the world leader on this, by the way, in West Texas with enhanced oil recovery, along with the North Sea. So we have an opportunity here to make a lot of money cleaning up the world on this. Your question or comment about renewables is part of this. So Texas is a world leader on wind. We're number 2 in the world in natural gas production, number 4 in refining, number 6 on wind. We're a big wind power. We're not a big solar power, even though we have the photons. And sort of what's going to happen with solar in Texas? Well, we will be. So Texas was not even in the top 10 in the United States 2 years ago. We will be number 2, maybe this year or next year behind California. We might pass California on industrial solar within a year or two. The rooftop solar will take a while for us to catch California. And so all of a sudden we're going to become a global level player on solar for a couple of reasons. One is solar prices have dropped a lot. They're finally at a point where they're outbidding everyone on the market. Solar power is cheaper than coal or natural gas or nuclear. The other thing in Texas, we have a lot of cheap, flat, sunny land. We got a lot of photons on land that's cheap to build on, compared to California, where it's mountainous or wooded, much more expensive to build a solar farm in California than in Texas. The other thing is we built some of the infrastructure. A decade plus ago, Democrats and Republicans came together to build what are called the CREZ lines. CREZ lines are competitive renewable energy zone, or CREZ zones lines. These transmission lines that move photons to electrons or wind to electrons from West Texas to Houston and Dallas and Austin and San Antonio. We built the infrastructure. We also have this cultural attitude where we like to make money from our land, so it's easy to do it. The other thing is, ironically, we have a weak environmental lobby in Texas that has trouble stopping the solar farms from happening the way they can in California. So I think we're going to build a lot of stuff, and I think it's just going to happen. So Texas will be a leader on solar. It's coming. One of the customers for the solar are oil and gas companies for the refineries and elsewhere, which is sort of interesting. So oil and gas companies would rather buy cheap solar and sell their gas and oil rather than burn oil and gas on site to make electricity. So there's a big opportunity for Texas. We could be the world's hottest hotspot for oil production, gas production, refining, wind production, solar production, carbon dioxide sequestration. And by the way, if you ever want a lithium-ion battery, the guy who invented it's in my department, mechanical engineering at UT. He got the Nobel Prize in October for it. So we've got a lot of leadership to offer in this low carbon future.
So lots of great questions in the Q&A, and I think we only have time for really one more. And certainly energy storage, distributed systems versus centralized microgrids, carbon dioxide sequestration. But let me ask you a landmine question that's a little political.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
That'll be fun.
So there's this perception that environmental impacts and this kind of balance of energy production is a hoax, right? And how do we start to shift thinking to a more science-based approach to this? To your point earlier, right? That this long-term global thinking and that there's an economic and environmental benefits that converge. And how do we shift thinking to be more science aligned that moves us in that direction?
This is a great question, and the pandemic is like a real-world, real-time example of what happens if you don't trust science. And let me tell you the way it operates in France versus Texas with the pandemic, because I think this is an analog for what's happening with climate change. So in the United States, with the virus coming in, with coronavirus, by the way, which is very scary, I had it in January before people knew it was circulating. I've never felt so sick in my life. It is whipping through nursing homes in Texas right now. It's a scary thing. And it's killing people at a rate 5 times higher than the flu or other things. Right? So this is a scary thing. In the United States, we spend a lot of time saying it's not real. It's a hoax. It'll die in the heat. It will be solved with this unproven medical treatment. A vaccine will be available in a few months. Usually it takes years to make vaccines, and maybe we can accelerate it. So we had a lot of like non-scientific statements driving public policy in the United States and in Texas, and that slowed down our response. And so we didn't move quickly to social distancing, masking, standards, expectations on disinfection, that kind of thing, because we were in the process of just disbelieving it was real. Well, it's not even real. Or if it's real, it's not even going to kill us. Or it's going to kill us, we can use this unproven technique to solve it, or it'll just go away magically, that kind of thing. In France, which I was experiencing in real time, France was like, holy cow, this is real. It's a killer. It's growing quickly, exponentially. Exponential growth is a very difficult concept for people. We need to shut down for a little while. Everyone go home, unless you're an essential worker. And by the way, a lot of us are not essential workers. I'm not an essential worker. If you're not essential, stay home. And you need to stay home, and you can't go out unless you have a real critical reason to go out. And they did that early, intensely, and for longer than we did in Texas, for example. And they got it under control. So they went from incredible outbreak, because France got it right after Italy. Italy is where it really took off in February, March. Then France and Spain got it next, then it went to the UK. The US had the opportunity to learn from these countries, but we didn't. We squandered that opportunity. But in France, they got under control. So a couple of weeks ago, Austin had 500 or 600 new cases per day of coronavirus. All of France had fewer. So Austin was having more people infected every day than all of France, because we had a different approach. Now France has it under control. They've opened up society, not to Americans, but to the French, so they're traveling around. And it's in basically like one person might die a day. In the United States, on average, over the last week, 1,000 people die a day. So this is the difference between like, well, if you're going to take the science of it versus not the science, then you affect your economic opportunities and you kill people. The same is true for climate change. Climate change is just a slower, later version of the pandemic. You have exponential growth, you have lag times, you have difficult policy decisions, you have trade-offs of life and death now versus life and death later. So it's the same kind of thing. In France, again, it's sort of like, well, it seems pretty serious. We should probably do something about carbon dioxide. We'll deal with it with efficiency. They've already decarbonized their power sector with nuclear, but they have to decarbonize transportation and building heat and this kind of thing. So France is not all the way there, but they took it seriously. The United States, we still argue about whether it's even real. Meanwhile, the tides are rising in Miami, and the king tide, which causes flooding there. We had Hurricane Harvey in 2017, which did $130 billion of damage. And by the way, 2 years prior to that, each year there was an unnamed the storm that did a lot of damage in Houston. So we're starting to have the problems. Hurricane Sandy did tens of billions of dollars of damage. And the idea of climate change is not that it invented hurricanes. Hurricanes are around before climate change, but that warmer oceans and warmer atmosphere intensify the hurricanes and intensify the amount of rain you get in these rain events. They make it more likely you have saltwater intrusion in coastal aquifers, and that you're more likely to have flooding, all these things. And the science is clear, but we argue that it's not even consensus there. It's not even real. Meanwhile, ice sheets melt and this kind of thing. So I think we should take it seriously. I think we can't take it seriously. I also don't think that doing the right thing by the environment will bankrupt us. My experience is if you invest to protect the environment, you create a whole new economic sector of people who clean up the environment, and we benefit from cleaner air and better productivity and better happiness and better interactions with nature. So it's sort of fascinating. How do we solve this? I don't know, but I think that discussion and education is the way to go. And I think explaining people in terms of the consequence of doing nothing. So people are worried that the consequence of doing something will be expensive. To tackle climate change will cost trillions or tens of trillions, I said at the opening of the hour. But the cost of doing nothing also costs a lot. And that's the pathway we have to examine and explain to people. Say, well, doing nothing is pretty risky. If you look at what, I don't know if you're following the story of the Arctic right now is getting hammered with the heat. And we might have ice-free summers in the Arctic from now on. I mean, this is bizarre for that ecosystem. So we have to explain that. We see trees getting killed and lost. We see seasons are different. These pine beetles are destroying forests in Colorado. So we can start to put a price on it. The price of doing nothing is pretty expensive.
Thank you so much, Dr. Michael Weber, and thank you, Dr. Eric Rowe, for this interesting and thought-provoking conversation. It was phenomenal, so we really appreciate it. And thank you all for joining us and providing your outstanding questions. We could not get to all your questions, so we look forward to you joining us in the future. We want to formally thank you for joining today's webinar and hope you had you found the conversation valuable. Next, we wanted to highlight a few of our professional development short courses and future webinars. As you saw in today's presentation, good leadership is always needed in tackling some of the world's biggest challenges, such as energy. And so we at Texas Engineering Executive Education have carefully created a certificate program that pinpoints today's tools and methodologies to tackling leadership challenges for STEM professionals. And here are some of the upcoming classes and the class dates. So if you would like to learn more, please visit our website and check out our YouTube page from last week's webinar discussion. Also, we wanted to quickly highlight the upcoming energy-related courses with petroleum fundamentals and petroleum measurements. If you or your organization need additional training in this area, please contact our PETEX department today. We also wanted to thank the 3 units of the Cockrell School of Engineering that helped put this wonderful program together. Texas Engineering Executive Education works to reskill and upskill companies' current workforce, either through our master's degree programs, graduate certificates, or short courses. So if you have a need around STEM education or training, make sure to contact our department today. The next sponsor was PETEX, or the Petroleum Extension of Texas. This department has around 75 years serving the oil and gas professionals, either through e-learning, publications, and online and in-person training. We have the training needs to meet your oil and gas companies. And last but not least, we have our research relations team. This team partners with industry to solve some of the world's biggest problems in water, transportation, energy, wireless communications, and many more. The Office of Research Relations works to facilitate and derive high value from research collaborations between companies and UT researchers. Email the Research Relations Office to initiate a discovery discussion. So all 3 units, we're here to serve you and your company through education, training, and research. So feel free to contact us at any time, and we would love to collaborate on helping you reach your company's full potential. And as we continue in our Tech Talk series, I want to make sure you're aware of our 2 upcoming webinars. First, on August 7th, we will have Professor Venkat Subramanian, who will be discussing model-based battery management systems for current and next generation batteries. With the recent announcement of Tesla move to Austin, I know this is going to be an exciting conversation, so we look forward to your questions. And on August 28th, we will have Professor Eric Bickel speaking on COVID-19. What is the data really telling us? I know this is a hot topic, and we look forward to you joining us for this discussion as well. We hope each of you join us for future webinars, so mark your calendars today. If you would like to provide feedback on today's webinar or suggestions for future topics that may interest you, please include them in the survey following this presentation. Once again, we would like to thank you for joining us today, and we hope you have a great weekend, and hook 'em horns.